So he's on his knees and he's peering out the flap on the side of his tent. So I'm like, Toby, man, what is it? Is it park rangers? Who's out there? And he did this and told me to be quiet. He said, shh, they're still out there. And I'm, who's still out there, Toby? And he didn't answer me. And I got to my knees and I pulled back the flap of my tent about an inch. And when I looked out, I saw what looked like a dozen, maybe 15. I didn't count them. I wish I had a dozen or 15 of these little guys that I took to be children. And we were far enough away that they weren't real plain to see, but when the points on the triangle would flash, that would illuminate the underside of this thing somewhat, because it's only, at this point, when we went to bed, it was 3,000 feet over our heads. I want to be clear, it had descended and was now just 30 feet over the top of that meadow. So that's how we were able to get some perspective as to the size of it and the true depth of it. And I asked Toby, I said, Toby, man, what the hell are these kids doing out here in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the night? And he said, Terry, man, those ain't no little kids. Look at them. They're not human beings. And he said, don't you remember? They took us and they hurt us. And we had, when he said that, it was just like a smack in the face. And I came out of it and I was absolutely terrified. And I was scared to death that one of us were going to, would cough or sneeze or make some kind of inadvertent noise that would draw their attention. And, we had no way to know that they were long done with us. They'd done what they wanted to do and dumped us back off. And so we watched them. And while we're watching, there came another column of light from underneath this thing. And this was a column of white visible light about 30 feet in diameter. It was about as wide as this thing was off the ground. And it had that same visible white quality to it, this visible beam of light. And as soon as that clicked on, all these little guys that were walking around, and I saw what Toby meant. In the flashes of light, I could see these were not human beings. Their heads were disproportionate to their bodies, and they walked with a very unique gait. They walked almost like their legs were hinged to go backward, like an inch and a half with each step. So in that regard, they kind of like dragged their leg from behind when they made a step forward. It was just weird to see. And as soon as the light clicked on, they all made their way toward this thing, this light, this column of light. And they would step into it in twos and threes. And within maybe 15, 20 seconds, they would just pixelate out and be gone. Very much like, and I've never been a science fiction fan. And the only reason I know this is my wife watched it when we were dating, the old Star Trek where they had the transporter ponder, whatever the hell it was called, the column, and the images of the characters would pixelate out, very much like that. So we watched until the last two guys disappeared. Then the light shut off, and there had been a droning noise from this thing. A noise that wasn't so much loud, but it was powerful. You could kind of feel it in your chest. It was, have you ever stood next, if you've ever stood next to like a diesel locomotive that's idling or a big piece of some kind of industrial machinery, you know the noise. It's not loud, but you can feel it in your chest. And that's what this was like. And that shut off. And the moment that shut off, the lights on all 3 points, of course we could only see two, but the lights in the triangle switched from multicolored to all white. And then it lifted off, and it didn't go off like a rocket. It just lifted off like a hot air balloon, and it went straight up. And we saw it, the higher it went, the faster it went, and it went from 3 visible lights to 1 light, and then, in a matter of seconds, it was gone. And we were so terrified. I was insistent. I said, look, let's stay here till dawn. The and we had no idea what time it was. We both wore nice wind-up watches that were the standard of the day. I mean, they were integral to the job of being an EMT. You needed a good watch. Both of our watches had stopped at 2:40. So that had to be AM because they were working when we went to bed, I believe. And I didn't want to, Toby wanted to get out of there, but I didn't want to make it to, I didn't want to run to the car. I didn't want to be, all I had over my head was a piece of canvas, but I felt like it gave me cover. And I didn't want to sacrifice that and be vulnerable in the run from the tent to the car. So I was content to stay there till dawn. But he was insistent that we get the hell out of there. And I asked him, I said, man, can you get me out of here without breaking an axle? You know, in a 66 Impala, you know, in terrain that's better suited for a Range Rover. And he's like, yeah, trust me, I got this. And he did. Now, I will say that he made some notes with a pencil on the back of a bank envelope that he found in my glove box when we were driving in. But it still baffles me how he was able to navigate us out of there in the middle of the night with so many turns and get us right back to Blacktop. We were both injured. We both, of course, Toby didn't sunburn, but he was burnt nonetheless. And I was burned. I had like the worst sunburn I'd ever had in my life, all over my body, under my arms, soles of my feet. I mean, everywhere I'm burned. And dehydrated, we were terribly dehydrated. I really was so thirsty. I can't explain it. And we made our way back to base. And coming up on the end here, I just want to say that we made a pact that we would not tell, because we knew we were sick enough, we weren't going to have to go to the hospital. And that was kind of an embarrassment because we were members of the hospital squadron. And
It froze up on me.
we knew everybody. We knew everyone. Just telling a lie would not be good. We wanted to be truthful. And so we decided that we would tell them that we went to bed feeling like hell and just woke up sicker than dogs and came home. Because when we left our tent, Toby's backpack, his nice Coleman cooler. We left everything. I took my wallet, my car keys. That's it. We didn't care about anything. We just wanted to get out of there with our lives. And that's what we did. So, reflection.
You know, that I couldn't even imagine. And, you know, the part of your book, when you really wanted to not tell anybody and you guys wanted to keep this a secret, but, you know, someone had other plans and you were both kind of, were you summoned in the hospital? Did you get sick enough to go to the hospital, or were you summoned and then took into the hospital?
When I got home, when I walked in the door, my wife was like, hey, you're back early. Whoa, what the hell happened to you? You know, I must have looked rough. I said, you know, what do we have to drink? I'm just so thirsty. And I just was pounding these glasses of powdered lemonade that she made for me. And she helped me get my boots off. And she's like, you're so sunburned. Why didn't you use sunscreen? Like, you know, we weren't out in the sun, you know. And she felt my forehead. She said, you're burning up with fever. And I was. My fever was over 103, which, you know, for an adult is not healthy. So she got me a handful of aspirin, and I took 3 or 4, and she said, you know, you're going to have to go to the hospital. And I said, I know. So, yeah, when we got to the hospital, curiously, they separated the two of us. And I'm told are you familiar with Robert Hastings?
Yeah.
Okay, Robert's a friend of mine, and he's become a friend of mine. He wrote the foreword to the second book.
Okay.
A very nice, very kind foreword that's not in there yet. I have to, because he didn't have it done, and I wanted to push the book out in time for Christmas. So, but I'm going to include that. Um, Robert and I talked for a long time in our first conversation, and he's like, so much of your story I've heard before. And he said, it's absolutely standard procedure for them to separate the two of you. He says, if three people see and he says, there's a little bit of difference in your story. He says, two guys on active duty see a saucer dart across the sky. They'll call them in, debrief them, interrogate them, and tell them, what you saw was probably an aircraft. We got ping of it on radar. It was an F-101, blah, blah, blah. Tell them a lie and give them a stern warning, don't talk about it. But our encounter was a little more intimate than that. And for people that have a little more intimate encounter, they immediately separate the two of them. I was ordered to have no contact with Toby, and likewise. And they cut orders for him to Japan. I mean, at light speed. He was, boom, gone. And just real quick, I should add, while I was in the hospital, OSI came, two OSI agents. OSI, of course, is the Office of Special Investigations. It's the investigative branch of the Air Force's security police. Kind of like NCIS is to the Navy, OSI is to the Air Force, if that makes sense for you folks. But I'm sure you know the difference. And this OSI agent, two OSI agents, came in while I was in the hospital and interrogated me and scared the hell out of me and read me my rights. Didn't accuse me of a crime, though. I'm 22 years old. I don't have the benefit of life experience. I don't have the benefit of a law degree. I mean, I'm just a young kid who'd never been in any trouble in his life. And I am thinking, oh my God, did we burn the forest down? That's the first thing I thought, and of course we didn't. What they did was park rangers found all our stuff. And I believe it's because we didn't put that gate back up on a chain. They knew someone had been in there. Toby had his name and address on base in his backpack, written in magic marker. And I think what they did was they probably called the base and said, hey, two of your airmen have been down here. And they got a little camp set up. Looks like they're planning on coming back. But moreover, I think that they knew. I think that the OSI, independent of whatever information they may have got from the Parks Department, they knew what we saw. And I know that because this guy and these guys interrogated me, and I mean, years later, I mean, having worked as a DA, I understand a little bit about police interrogation and the process of intimidation and how it works. And, they just kind of harassed me really for about 30 minutes and then they left. But before the guy left, this agent in charge was a major, Major Gregory, and he got down next to my ear after his cohort left. And he whispered, he said, and he had this Alabama accent, and he's like, son, if you've ever talked to Calvin Parker, you know what it's, he's got the same Calvin Parker kind of accent. And he says, son, I know, and you two knuckleheads stumbled onto something while you were out there. And I think you know what I mean. And I didn't know how to answer him. So I didn't. And he said, oh yeah, I know you know what I'm talking about. And I mean, it was common knowledge among the hospital squadron that I was an amateur photographer, and the hospital commander had one of my prints hanging up in his office, so I mean, it was well known. So, and the OSI agent says, all I want to know is how many pictures you took of it. And without thinking, I blurted out, sorry, I never took a single picture. And he just smiled because that was an admission. He got me. I mean, that was good interrogation technique. He got me. So he said, I don't believe you, and packed up his stuff and left. So they knew. I don't know how they knew. They knew.
You know, what's interesting about that, and we talked a little bit on our phone call about Rick Doty. And I had a conversation with Rick, who was with OSI, and he was read in 78, just a year after your incident. And so Rick was telling me about, and he may have shared this with you, about an incident with a lady in New Mexico who was abducted. And Rick never dealt with abductions, but the guy, he was doing his OSI thing with, I guess you'd call it an informant, someone he's working with that was a private citizen that was reporting things, and he did what OSI does and got in with him. This guy brought him a gal that had an abduction case, and so he thought it'd be worth talking to her. And when he's talking to her, she describes being taken to an underground facility near Kirkland Air Force Base called Coyote Canyon that no one knows about. There's no way she's going to know about it. She described the inside of that facility perfectly, enough to where he was so taken aback, he went out to Kirkland, got a host to take him downstairs just to look at everything. Everything matched exactly. VATS, the elevator, the platform for nuclear launch, and these portals she kept talking about. And he didn't see those, but he did see one, and he said it's an escape hatch. And it shook him up, so he went back and talked to her just to make sure. Have you ever been in the military? Have you had friends of the military? Just on and on. And it was clear. It was clear to him she hadn't. It was clear to him there was something going on. So he files a report. Well, it goes to the DIA. Or he didn't know that. He put it to his boss. 2 DIA guys show up.
Yeah.
And they said, we came to talk about your report. And he said, okay. And he said, before we start, what department within the DIA are you? And they looked at him straight in the face, said, the abduction department. And he said, the government has an abduction department. And they said, yeah. And they weren't playing around. 2 hours later, he was debriefed into that program. Yeah. And not that he spent a lot of time involved with those cases, but because this was one like that. And Rick was an example of, the OSI guys that did to you a year previously, what he was briefed into to do, the next 10 years. So, people talk about Men in Black. Well, it's they don't have to be in black, but there's investigative arm that's their function. So yeah, it sounds like at 22 years old, you had a rude awakening in that world.
I did. I don't tell many people this, but it was a change. It changed my life. And I think that Toby and I both were two different people when we came back from that trip. And also something changed between us. This guy was my best friend, and now I wanted nothing to do with the guy. And I can't reconcile that. I don't know. I think that speaks to the level of influence that they have over us and our emotion. I didn't want to be around the guy. Yeah. And so when I heard that they were shipping him to Japan, I thought, well, that's fine. I didn't want to be around him. I didn't care for him. I couldn't rationalize it, but I felt a really strong compulsion to stop by and tell him goodbye and wish him well. I don't know if I told you this when we spoke last time or not. Okay, then it's brief. I asked my wife one day to drop me by Toby's house on her way home from the base grocery store. And she was driving, it was her Carmen Gia. And I said, park out front. I just want to run in. I want to say goodbye to Toby. And I need to do this. It's unfinished business. I need to shake his hand and tell him goodbye and wish him well. And I thought that would give me some measure of peace with this thing. That was my expectation anyway. But it didn't work out that way. And I went up to the door, the same door I'd walked through 100 times before. And as was my usual habit, I knocked on the door, opened the door, and said, "Hey guys, it's me." And just kind of stepped in. And Toby's wife walked by me, and they were packing. And she had, I think it was a lamp in her hand. Something, may have been a box, but I think it was a lamp. And she said, "You're not supposed to be here." And I said, "Yeah, I know." I said, "I'm not here to confront anybody. I just want to say goodbye to Toby." And Toby must have heard our exchange because he came around the corner from the bedroom. And I looked at him and I just felt stunned because he looked like hell. He did. He was one of these guys who was always so meticulous about his appearance. He was always clean shaven, always had his hair cut within regs, always had a really crisp starched uniform, shined his shoes, kept slim, did everything that I didn't do. I was the slob in the duo, but he was always just look, spot on. And he was unshaven. His hair was all sideways. He had on a dirty t-shirt, barefoot, dirty jeans. And I'm thinking, the guy's moving. I can cut him some slack for that. And he walked up to me and it felt awkward. It didn't feel like the same friend that I knew just a couple of weeks earlier. And I held out my hand and he held out his, and we did this really inelegant handshake that we finally, and I said, "Hey man, I just want to wish you well." I mean, I felt it'd been appropriate to embrace the guy, but I didn't. And he was shorter than I am, and he looked up at me and he said, "It happened, didn't it, Terry?" And I said, "Yes, my brother, it really happened, and you're not losing your mind." And he's looking up at me, and I could smell liquor on his breath. And his eyes were like road maps. And I'd never seen him. I'd never seen the man drunk. I'd never seen him drink more than a beer, maybe a beer and a half. And he said, "Yeah, but why us?" And I said, "Man, I don't have a expletive clue." And I broke my gaze with him. I looked down at my shoes, and I just felt overwhelmed with panic. And I ran out the front door and got in the car, and we went home. But that did not give me the measure of peace that I'd hoped for. It was not a positive experience. And again, I think that that's not my human nature or his. I think that speaks again to the level of influence that non-human entities have over us.
Yeah. And I know Toby met somewhat of an unfortunate end. It sounded like his life he never gained a semblance of a foothold back in the real world. And it's unfortunate. That's unfortunate. And wow. Well, one thing I did want to ask before we go today anyway, was before any of this happened, before you joined the service and when you were a child, there's some reference in your book of you seeing some things in your room as a youth. How was describe that if you could?
I can. And really, it goes back earlier than I say in the book. It goes back to probably age 4. Some of the things that I had to say are so outrageous that I really was concerned, and including them in the book would damage my credibility, because you're asking people to believe a lot. And but for the sake of honesty, I wanted to include as much as I felt the public could digest. So yeah, my memory goes back to age about 4, and they would take me as a kid, and I would go to this room with these other kids, and it was always the same other kids, and there were maybe 10 of us, and we would play in this big domed room, white domed room, and there was always the same woman there, kind of in charge. And at the time, back then, I called her Sue. Now, I'm only 4 years old, but I knew a woman named Sue who happened to be petite and Asian, who was a neighbor. So in my mind's eye, I'm thinking, well, she's like Sue, I'll call her Sue. And that was my name for her. And that's the same entity as Betty that came to visit me in 2017. No doubt. Same one and the same. And I think that's why I felt such a strong maternal feeling for her, is because she took care of us when I was a little kid. And I have memories of being in there, and we were given these geometric forms that she would ask us to put into there were different colors, ask us to put them into certain arrangements. And when we did, she'd give us high praise. If we didn't, she'd, very patiently sit down and show us how to do it properly. And one of the exercises she had us do, and I don't remember if I put this in the red book or not, The Reckoning, but I meant to. And that is that we had these uh, geometric shapes. I had a cube. Some people had pyramids. Some people had globes. They were all different colors. Mine was a blue cube, and it weighed absolutely nothing. It had zero mass. I mean, I could hold it out and drop it, and it would fall to the floor. But to pick it up, it didn't weigh anything. And what she would do is we were sitting like cross-legged on the floor, facing a wall, and we would set this object in front of us, and she wanted us to move it with our minds. And the whole time we were on this, I was on this thing, we spoke telepathically, and it just seemed very natural when I was there. And I couldn't do it. I tried several times and failed. And then on one event, I was concentrating on it real hard for it to move, and it just flew. And it flew across maybe 6 feet or so. But she came over and gave me high praise for that. And so you really did good. And then I thought, oh boy, I'll be able to do that back home. But, of course, it never worked on this planet. I don't know where we were. I think we were on some craft of some kind. I talk in Incident at Devil's Den about seeing the monkey men in my room. And, in the back of Devil's Den, I think I told you this, I put a email address and said, if you had a like experience and like to talk to somebody, 1,500 people more have contacted me. But I'm not the only one to have experienced that, being taken at age 4, 5, 6, 7. And, people have these experiences, and they write to me, and, the demographics are interesting because I took all these letters, all these emails, and I did an Excel spreadsheet looking for commonalities. And the demographics kind of surprised me. Most of the people that responded to me with credible stories were 50 years old or older. And the common theme was, yeah, I had this really crazy dream from when I was 4 or 5. I can't remember the birthday parties or vacations, but I can remember this dream from 4 or 5. And, I think that it's very telling. So I don't think it was a dream.
No, and that struck me too when we talked the other day, and you were talking about that age demographic, and it kind of occurred to me that maybe you get to a point in your life where something like yourself with your leg and you're running and this implant, and it just prompted you to say, you know what, I wasn't going to say anything, but now I am. And you were just retired, right? So you didn't have to face, putting it out there and then representing people or, being an attorney. And I wonder if
being ostracized from the legal community would have been the end of my career.
Because it sounds like that demographic is retirement age for the most part. And maybe people are, I've held this my whole life. I just don't give a, what now. I'm coming out with it. And then the other question that dawned on me as well. And we talked a little bit about that, and this kind of ties into, we talked about your childhood and obviously the incident at Devil's Den. And then the same entity, I know in 2017, paid you a visit. Anything in your life, adult life, that same time frame, maybe 50 years till now, is there anything that continues to happen, or do you think in some way you were part of a process for them up until a certain age, and then with maybe the people that have reached out to you, is there any commonality there in the age bracket, 50 years on? Do they still have things going on, or does it seem like it's almost been that process from childhood till your prime, and certain years later, it's not so much?
Very, very few people, only a handful, wrote to me and said, I had this one major event. And I wrote back and I said, are you sure, that you don't have other memories? I said, I'm not looking for you to make something up, but I said, I need a candid reply. And I either didn't get an answer, or I got an answer in the negative. But for most of us, people that have had experience at this level of intimacy are experiencers for a lifetime. if we do have the chance to get together, I have some photographs. I can show you the originals on my phone. I've been seeing UFOs in the sky all my life. I saw two. I saw one when I was 8 years old, 1963. I saw a saucer in my backyard. That's in Devil's Den.
Good.
And then at age 11, I had the same experience. And then what's interesting is, I was age 11, and then 10 years later, roughly in 1977, I had the experience. And then 10 years later, in 1987, I had the experience. And I had, odd dreams and, minor experiences throughout. One of the things my wife and I have been plagued with, and we'll be together 47 years, March 15th. So, we know one another very well. And one of the things we share in common is every place we've ever lived, we've had poltergeist-like activity in our home. Our TV will turn on in the middle of the night. Our kids, they were out of college, but they came down. Well, no, my daughter was still just graduated from high school. Anyway, our kids spent time with us when we were in Samoa, and they saw some crazy stuff. They saw funny lights, and they believed that the house was haunted as hell. They really did. And we've had those kind of things before. I've also had increased intuition. That's come in handy a lot, but my intuition is through the roof.